Hello, this is Jeffrey Skinner, and this is my homework for submission presentation for game design class. And for the three materials we did, we have a fire effect with embers. So let me go ahead and hop in the game. So we have this fire effect with embers, and all of these are done with shaders. Nextly, we have generated pattern, and I'm kind of using these because what I wanted to demonstrate as well is you can see like the reflection of these objects really well, so that's why I chose this material specifically. Now, as for the fire, the material itself, the shader itself isn't too complicated. So first of all, we're taking time as an input, and we also have time coefficient, which is kind of just the speed, right? So we're just multiply time and speed together to get the speed of time, essentially. And then we have this built-in function called flipbook, which just essentially takes a sprite sheet and then picks out squares, kind of like chops out squares on that sprite sheet to give you specific textures. And we're actually sampling per texture. So this texture is changing with time. And this is actually just a white texture. So, and we're slightly desaturating it as well. So we have this gradient, which is kind of essentially getting blended in. We're just multiplying these two together because this is like a scalar times a vector, essentially. So we would be getting all the color data from this, and this would be the opacity data, essentially. And then, so I'm using essentially this simple grass wind function, which I'm basically treating it more as like a noise algorithm, like a Perla noise or simplex noise, or a smooth noise algorithm. That's how I'm using this. Those are my intentions of how I'm using this function, and it can also be seen in the other materials that I have. But essentially, we're getting this wind, and then I'm just dotting it with kind of like an up vector, essentially, to get an kind of like quote unquote arbitrary detail with respect to the wind. And with that, I can kind of use that as a seed for kind of like for detail. So it's like arbitrary detail, essentially, uniform, not really uniform because it's biased towards the up direction, but we can plug this in to the world position offset. And as you can see, in the game, if we look back into the game, it actually displaces the fire. So this is the fire is on a quad in 3D. Fire is always looking in our direction, which is not, it's kind of like old style, but it's not. It's fast. It's smoke or anything like that. So just being able to have this plane constantly looking in our direction saves us cycles, a lot of cycles. And so this is how that is how this one works. And we also have the fire blueprint, which is actually what these objects are, and they're using the fire material. So if we look into this blueprint, so we have a piece of wood, but it really has a little bit more geometry than probably like a lot of triangles in it. But it's essentially a quad, and it's just being warped. And then that texture is just vertex shader, essentially. So yeah, that's how the fire works. Next up, we have our radiation, black body radiation. So, right, we're quite literally starting out with a black body, and the idea is that black bodies with high temperatures start producing actual like light, visible light on the light spectrum. But the thing is, I'm not actually using pure black just because I wanted to be able to get some kind of details. So I'm actually using a granite, I believe it's a rock texture basalt, and we're just getting the texture coordinate and sampling the texture, the UV coordinate of this texture. And then we also have this color parameter, which is black at default, but as you can see here, we're able to use even blue. Like, we can put our own colors into this, and in the case of in the game, yeah, we're using blue, and these are getting added together, and I'm kind of weighing it out with an emission coefficient as well. And if we go down here, we're doing the same thing again, where we're using the simple grass wind function kind of as a, procedurally random values is essentially what I'm using it for. And we're using this for the displacement of the texture, as well as the color emission. This is getting weighted. We're doing a weighted kind of sum. So this is getting combined with the emission as well as the position offset. And as you can see in the game, there is actual, little detail that you can see. It's not just pure white. Right. And then last of all, we have our hex texture, our hex material. And this one is definitely very I'm not saying slow, but in terms of shaders, you don't want to be like, procedural stuff is always going to be slower, because we're not it's not really represented by an algebraically per se. It's more like a discontinuous function, which usually, right, we just got like one branch, so it's really not horrible, to be honest. But anyways, we're taking the texture coordinate, and we're doing this divide by half. I don't know why I did that. And then we're actually taking masking the green and red channels, and we're multiplying it by half. And then we're using this frac because this is essentially the same as modulo 1, right? So per 1 unit, this texture, this coordinate will repeat. So we can essentially sample, wherever on here, it will wrap from 0 to 1. And that's another thing about procedural to things like repeating. Like, the complexity of it is quite limited if you're only using like modulus and stuff like that, unless you want it to be really slow and do like more complex things. But for the sake of a hexagonal texture, it's not so hard to make it a repeating hexagon pattern. And here we have this branch statement, which isn't so horrible, and we're actually appending the colors, and we're using kind of the green and red channels as kind of their own composite, like their own compositing, quote unquote, because we're creating this hexagon with kind of 2 layers. Like, it's kind of hard to explain, but later on, we subtract by a half. Right, so this is just essentially for calculating, the actual part of the hexagon. And these are the constants I ended up solving for this. And yeah, right, so we're using again, we are using the simple grass wind function for procedural vector again, just to get this detail, because as you can see here, the emissive color is kind of changing with time, but it's the reason, like,